And all right, we are live. All right, so we're just gonna give it a quick little like 30-second, minute or two period just to basically let people filter on in because obviously people aren't gonna come in right away. Um, yeah, so I guess it's just not gonna be much. Just I guess we're just gonna wait for a bit. Let me check something. Is William showing up on the stream? So let's hope we can hear William because basically on the stream, when it's streaming to basically hear it, you're not being able to see him. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, and
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
okay,
Okay.
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, you can't see me. That's okay. That's fine.
That's as intended.
I don't know. I don't know why you can't see me, but maybe it's something on my end. I don't know.
No worries.
All right, so I think basically, let me check this here quickly. I think we at least should probably try to get going, to be fair. Yeah, all right. So this is the second the Canada Files news stream. We're trying to host it like every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So I'm joined by a few special guests today. They are Joe Emersberger, Roderic Day, and William Dere, who is there. You just might not be able to see him on the screen. So obviously a big thanks to the guests coming on out. And just to mention, I am the editor-in-chief of the Canada Files, which is obviously the platform which is the stream is being done for. So let's start with for all of you, basically, if you could like introduce yourselves a little bit and tell people about you. So Joe, would you mind starting?
Okay, I'm based here in Windsor, Ontario, and I've written a lot about foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy, which is basically really Canadian foreign policy because they overlap so much. And I've written primarily in recent years for fair.org, looking at analyzing how the media distorts foreign policy, especially about Latin America, because it's where my family's from. I was born in Canada, but my mom's from Ecuador originally, and grew up speaking Spanish. So been to Ecuador all the time, constantly, all through my life. So obviously really interested in Latin American politics, maybe for that reason. And speaking the language gives you it's easier for you to kind of peer behind the distortions a bit, because you can go directly to the sources and compare what's said about countries and to what the media says. So that's what I've been focused on, mainly in recent years at fair.org.
Yeah, that's fair. So I guess one of the questions, I won't go too long on this, but if I'm not correct, you're an engineer, right? So
Right.
Why, like, where was the interest? Where was the connection to start writing for like a place like Fair?
Well, before that, I was writing for Telesur, and my father was very political, always had books in the house, and ever since I was like 13 years old or so, I've been really following news very closely. I got really politicized, I'd say around 1979 with the revolution in Nicaragua. And right away, even at that age, and at the same time, the hostage crisis in Iran. And even at that time, at that age, you could see how things were getting distorted in the media, and I think my dad had a lot to do with that, because he brought me in contact with a lot of alternative sources that I wouldn't otherwise have seen, and viewpoints I would not otherwise have considered. So for a long time, I've been interested in that. And the engineering, well, I mean, I liked math and that, but also just for financial reasons, it's easier to get a job if you go into something like engineering, as opposed to something you might have been more passionate about, like history or something like that.
All right.
Coincidentally, I'm also an engineer.
Oh, cool.
Oh, well, isn't that pretty cool? So, Roderic, since you jumped on in, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I have not written for anywhere in particular. Some people have asked me, like, I basically started posting on Twitter a whole bunch, and a few people were like, "Oh, like I don't know, I developed a small following," and and some people have asked me to like get involved in stuff, and I'm like, I'm nobody. I'm just like a random software engineer in Montreal. But I realized that that's a little bit unfair, because I happen to believe that a lot of my favorite writers and the people doing a lot of good research are not professional historians or professional journalists. So I was like, it's not fair. I'll just participate. I'll help this be a little more organic and a little bit fuzzier around the edges. My story, very briefly, is that I grew up in South America, in Peru. Very kind of like bougie upbringing. Like, Peru is a very unequal society, and my upbringing was near the top of it. And then I wanted to get out of it. I just wasn't enjoying it very much, and I decided to come to Canada to study engineering. So I came to Montreal. I was like, it's not fair. I'll just participate. I'm hearing an echo.
Yeah, sorry. I'm going to try and turn this off.
I grew up.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
let me just handle this if necessary.
Because I just tuned into the live stream.
And there we go. Okay. Continue on, Roderic.
Yeah, sure. So I came to Canada, and I've always been kind of like left liberal growing up, kind of just like empathetic, but I was very busy with my studies pretty much. I was like, studying engineering, mechanical engineering, took up enough of my time alongside just socializing in college. But I always really I had this idea that I wanted to go back to Peru, and I love Montreal. As soon as I arrived in Montreal, I was like, the public transit is something that we do not have back in Lima, where I'm from. And the universal healthcare is another thing that healthcare was low quality or extremely expensive, private, inaccessible, etc. And these two things, I was like, this is amazing. And one day when I get my engineering job, I'm going to sit down and study how Canada got it. And I'm going to try to one day bring it to Peru. That's kind of like my little kind of like dream. And then what happened is that I started realizing that the story of how Canada got healthcare was a lot more complicated. It wasn't just like a few easy maneuvers. It's got like a huge geopolitical, historical component. And anyway, it got really complicated. So I got a lot involved in politics, started reading a lot more. And then what happened very recently is that I would say, talking about what radicalized you or what got you really involved, it would be the coup in Bolivia. Because I've always held Bolivia in high esteem as like a great role model for the rest of South America. It's just like a very interesting project. And seeing reality get distorted so fast and so quickly, and everyone started talking about like the narco dictator Evo Morales, and I was like, what's going on? Like, where did this come from? And there was a guy, well, there's many people, but one guy in particular, Oli Vargas from Cauchasum Coca News, and he was putting out really good
he's great.
He's great. And he was putting out videos, a lot of them were in Spanish, just for the local audience, like getting the news out within the Bolivian context. And I was like, look, I'm in Montreal. I don't have anything to do. I want to help. So I just started subtitling the videos. I just listened to them, added subtitles, uploaded them to YouTube, to Twitter. And that kind of like kickstarted like a little bit of like I got like a little bit of an audience, and I felt very good about doing that. And that pretty much I've been doing stuff like that. I've been just trying to participate in politics and add whatever I can. But I don't have a job in this or anything. I'm just a participant.
Yeah, no, that's totally reasonable. Yeah, so obviously we'll talk about this a bit later, but obviously you as well have done some terrific threads, which I'll be honest, like basically the gray zone was probably one of the, by far to me, probably one of the most crucial sites in my political development, because there's some articles basically that I wouldn't even basically accept like a pitch or submission of, that got published early on because I thought I was covering foreign policy from the left and there was a propaganda barrier, right? And so basically, I mean, even some of your threads actually were fairly important in kind of like really internalizing some of these details, because I knew with the gray zone, but it was some of these examples and some of these, the way you put it together, I'll give you some real credit that basically it was quite effective. So
thanks.
He's Roger's humble, but he's definitely done a good bit in a short time. So I guess, William, basically we've had you on the podcast before, but can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Oh, we lost him.
He may have muted.
Oh, yeah. Let's check here.
William is on mute.
Okay.
William is definitely on mute.
Hey, William, can you unmute?
popped up. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay, my name is William Dere. I'm probably been around a lot longer than any of you. I am also an engineer, retired. So I guess Aidan, you're outnumbered by engineers.
That's funny.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, that is funny. I live in Montreal. I came to Canada when I was 7. Actually, my father brought me to Canada when I was 7. And I don't know if you know about the head tax in the Chinese Exclusion Act. Well, my family has been in Canada for 3 generations, but I immigrated to Canada when I was 7. So you have to read about what happened in those years with the head tax in the Chinese Exclusion Act to understand why this is a situation for most old-time Chinese Canadians here in Canada who were affected by both the racist head tax and Chinese Exclusion Act, which actually lasted 62 years of Canada's history. Okay, having said that, I guess I've been around anti-imperialist politics for a very long time. I used to work with a Maoist organization, the Workers' Communist Party, and I was their anti-imperialist organizer in the 70s. And after the demise of that organization, I started engaging in the head tax Chinese Exclusion Act redress movement in the Chinese Canadian community. And so I was in that for about 20 years, for about 2 generations, no, 1 generation, 20 years, until we finally obtained an apology from the Canadian government in 2006. And so since then, I've been not too active. The only thing I've done is to write a book about that whole period of time.
That's all?
Just a book, just one.
Yeah, just one book. Just one book. So recently I've been writing articles for the Canada Files and also contributing to other anti-imperialists and people who've been organizations who are trying to oppose or to stop the new Cold War against China, which was led by that crazy guy there, Trump. But now we got another crazy guy named Biden who will probably continue this Cold War against China. And so I think this would be part of the anti-imperialist movement as we move on. All
right, terrific. So there's a lot of things to start off with, but I guess I'll give it to whoever wants to start here. Is there like a particular, let's say, piece of news in Canadian context? Now, this doesn't have to be exclusively foreign policy, but yeah, is there one that has caught any of your minds you might want to talk about?
No particular one. I thought I think the Canada Files had reported on the, I don't know how to describe it, the Epoch Times getting delivered using Canada Post and that thing. It's like a,
yeah, that's correct. Yeah,
it's like a pretty interesting one. I read it kind of like briefly. My head is often elsewhere, but like, what is the actual controversy here? Because I have infinitely low opinion of the Epoch Times, but what is the actual controversy? How come MPs are getting involved and stuff like that?
So, I mean, the essence of the controversy, I mean, I did a video on it and then Daniel Z did the article. And so the essence of it obviously is Epoch Times is obviously connected to Falun Gong, which is a literal cult, which obviously people are kind of starting to realize what the hell is up with the Capitol riots. Before that, I mean, people knew it long before that. And obviously, by the before Epoch Times Falun Gong paper, and basically the government of Canada is allowing this paper, which is virulently xenophobic, to be pushed all around Canada, basically, even like mainly through Canada Post using ad mail. And so basically, you have a case of like a cult-funded newspaper basically virulently bashing China, basically the one of like extreme xenophobia, and basically there's been a real news blast recently. Thousands of Canadians have been getting it, and it's honestly quite stunning because you see how once in a while like isolated spurts, but the thing has seemed to be the fact that it's been going so consistently to, quite frankly, so many people, and that's been the kind of newsworthy aspect to it, really. Is quite frankly the fact that so many Canadians are actually receiving a newspaper like this. Like, for example, you think of, for example, like Zhanjing and the controversy around there. Epoch Times is pushing misinformation and the whole genocide allegations there. But you know what? Talking about that, William did a terrific article for the Canada on the front. And Roderic, you've done many a great thread. So would basically one of you two want to maybe jump in and kind of break it down for potentially like audience members who haven't heard of this issue before?
So any of us jumping in and explaining what we understand of the situation in Xinjiang?
Yeah.
Well, an interesting thing that happened is that one of the threads that I made that took off in a big way had to do with Xinjiang. It's my Xinjiang thread. And what happened was that I work in like tech and finance, and an article is getting passed around that talked about, it was a Financial Times article that talked about the brewing Cold War against China and the eerie lack of dissent. So it's like there's this giant engine revving up for like something very, very serious in China, like moving ships to the South China Sea, the trade war. It's getting really heated. And what was strange was that there's even less of a dissenting voice than there was in the prelude to the Iraq War, at least from my memory of it. It was very quiet, and the article remarks on this. It was my impression, but somehow seeing it in such a bourgeois paper, I was like, wow, this is really serious. So I dug into it, and I almost like, I was surprised at how immediately people were like, some people were retweeting me and he's like, this guy's been to Xinjiang, you should listen to him. And I was like, whoa, take it easy. Like I haven't, I've just been like researching, right? But the way I understand it is that I use the phrase the Afghan Trap. The Afghan Trap is something that's attributed to, I forget how to pronounce his name. Maybe you know, Joe, but this is Zbigniew Brzezinski. Like he's like a big sage of American foreign policy.
Yeah,
he was very
Jimmy
involved.
Carter's key guy in foreign policy. Jimmy Carter
Key
was in
guy.
office in the 70s. Yeah.
Absolutely. Key guy.
He was big behind getting financing for Al Qaeda in Afghanistan when they were
correct. Yeah. Correct. So that's kind of one of the big things that caught my eye. Like Brzezinski was talking about the Afghan Trap. What is the Afghan Trap? The Afghan Trap was the idea that the Afghanistan was allied with the USSR, and they had like some kind of secular socialist government or something, and they were basically allied with the USSR. So the United States did was arm the Mujahideen, and then or supply them with weapons, supply them with. They basically turned the Mujahideen into like a force that could take on the secular civil society of Afghanistan, in order to topple down Afghanistan, and also to draw the Soviet army into a very, very internationally unpopular war. It's easy to forget now that like the Soviet Union is so demonized, but like back in the day, it was kind of like it's a Cold War. Like both sides are bad. You know what I mean? So it was really unpopular when the Soviet Union, as far as I understand it, when they went into Afghanistan to help Afghanistan quell the terrorism there. So my understanding is that if you take the narrative that's like, oh, genocide, cultural genocide, etc., ethnic persecution, the counter narrative to that is the Afghan Trap. It's like what the United States is trying to do in Xinjiang is to destabilize the region, exactly like pretty much in exactly the same way that they did in Afghanistan for the Soviet Union. This is the succinct way I'd put it. I don't know, maybe the other guests want to weigh in and say maybe there's some extra stuff in there.
Yeah, I just want to say a few things on this because it's related to the Cold War. Let's put it this way, because after the capitalist financial meltdown in 2008, all the Western world were pretty much in financial trouble, and China was the only one that, well, I wouldn't say the only one, but the major country that went through the 2008 meltdown relatively unscathed because of their different system, the socialist system, which was not tied to the American dollar. And so the Western world got very concerned about the rise of China, which actually was not necessarily the rise of China, but it was the fall of the Western world, the fall of US imperialism, or the beginning and the end of US imperialism. And so they were very concerned, and Obama was elected. And so Obama and his people, Obama, Biden, Clinton clique, came out with this pivot to Asia. And I guess at that time, they realized that even though they were cooperating with China with the hope of putting in all kinds of investments that they might be able to affect a regime change and change the system, change the communist or socialist system that was in China at that time. But to their dismay, the Chinese people had other ideas. And so China continued developing on track according to its own 5-year plans. And so the Americans, or the Western world led by the Americans, were looking at what they need to do because they were getting scared that China was going to surpass the Americans. And so they were looking at various pressure points. First, Tibet. Tibet was always there, but the Dalai Lama was becoming pacifist in his old age. And in fact, he himself said, I do not want to separate Tibet from China. It's the best thing for Tibet to remain in China. So the West is not able to count on the Dalai Lama, even though they gave him the Nobel Peace Prize. They cannot count on the Dalai Lama to lead the insurgency in Tibet. And besides that, the Tibetan people were not opposed to being called Chinese in any way because their life expectancy doubled in the 50 years that they were part of the People's Republic of China. And so the West had to look at various other pressure points. And one of them was Xinjiang, because they thought that Xinjiang was populated mainly by Muslims. And so so with the terrorism that was going on at that time, they tried to instigate Uyghur terrorism or Islamic terrorism by using the Uyghur population in Xinjiang. And this is how this whole Xinjiang as the pressure point came about, because prior to 2008, how many people have heard of Xinjiang? I'm sure not too many. I was in Xinjiang actually in I guess 2013. That was at the height of the terrorism that was going on. In fact, when I was there, bus stations were getting blown up and various terrorist attacks were going on. But the people of Xinjiang, none of them showed any hostility to me as a Han person that was visiting their region. And so there was a lot of heightened security going on at that time because of the terrorist attacks. And so from that day on, I think the Chinese government tried to get things under control. And this is where the re-education centers idea for re-education was taken hold. and this is what the West is focusing on, the fact that the Chinese were trying to educate Uyghur youth for the job market, and so today, we have what so-called slave labor or forced labor, boycott of Xinjiang goods, and so on and so forth. But all this is based on fabrication, in the same way that the Iraq War was based on the fabrication, was based on a big lie, in the same way that the Vietnam War was based on a big lie, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the Korean War was based on another big lie. And so I don't think the US is in any shape to start a war with China, but the Cold War against China is probably the next best thing as far as the Americans are concerned. And so with Biden, I think he's put in a new Secretary of State who got his training or internship under Obama and Clinton. So I can see him continuing the same, policies going forward.
Yeah, his confirmation hearing. I don't know, you probably seen it on Twitter. It's nice that now with Twitter you can instantly get stuff like his Blinken's the guy's name, the new Secretary of State.
Yes, Blinken.
Yeah, his confirmation hearing was just chilling. That guy is horrible. He's not as obnoxious, or Pompeo was such a thug. To me, Pompeo was more repulsive than Trump, because Trump had a kind of a clownish charisma, if you will. You know what I mean? Whereas Pompeo is just a straight out thug, and Blinken is not much better than him. In his remarks about China, about Venezuela, about just going on about Israel. I mean, my God, apartheid Israel is he used the word sacrosanct,
Yeah.
they're just terrible.
Yeah, something important there actually is, I think we all knew it was Israeli apartheid for a long time, but a major Israeli human rights group, I think it was B'Tselem, they basically formally came out and said it is apartheid. And that's basically a huge thing, especially for like an official kind of mainstream group to come out and say that. And then, surprise, surprise, basically, obviously, first of all, you have Blinken basically pushing the usual U.S. line on Israel. But then you have Trudeau meeting with Netanyahu a few days later. And it just kind of shows that the North American foreign policy in the region is just really garbage there. And I would obviously argue it's independently garbage, even if it's very closely tied. But it's garbage regardless of how you tie it up, really. So yeah, I guess the one thing I want to mention, basically, there's something big that's come, but I want to discuss the article first, because I have a big feature coming out in nearly 3,000 words for Plan A magazine, which William has had an article or two republished in there. It's a great magazine. And so basically, it's taking a look at and actually, I have to give you credit, Roderic, because you had like a tweet, right? Just saying basically that the smears against China and Xinjiang was kind of based off some shame around Canadian colonialism and that history there. So I basically thought, well, that's worth looking, and then basically ended up with a 3,000 word piece. Mainly there's a few bad faith like social democrats that pissed me off enough that I decided I needed to do a 3,000 word thing on this. But point being, I guess the biggest thing in tying in the whole Xinjiang in that discussion is that the Canadian left is like the social, not all the left obviously, but especially I would argue the social democratic left, a lot of elements of that are really like complicit in kind of that imperialism, and I think it's kind of part of it really is part of like a pattern. And I've written about this in the past, right? But basically, you have the case where the NDP, they supported bombing Libya, they've supported NATO for ages, they demonized the Hong Kong security law, Jagmeet Singh opposes BDS, they've even pushed for more military spending. So you have basically, like in this case, like social democrats, like prime social democrats in the country pushing this. And I guess really to tie it up is just that it's quite dangerous, especially in combating this when you have like center left that's so has a foreign policy so tied to like Mike Pompeo and his bunch of nut jobs?
So if I may expand on, I think the tweet that you're referencing.
Yeah, sure.
What happened in my experience was that I really wanted to learn what was happening. So when I found out these accusations of what was going on in Xinjiang, I was trying to understand how I felt about China, because like growing up in Latin America, then moving to Canada, like China is just kind of this distant entity, right? And I'm studying engineering, so again, it just doesn't come up. Like if you don't do geopolitics, especially before the pivot to Asia, China was just kind of like quietly humming over there, pretty much. And then when these accusations heat up, Hong Kong accusations, police repression, of course, like then you got the South China Sea, then you got Xinjiang, Taiwan. I'm like, what? Tibet? Like, what's happening in China, right? So I started investigating, and I start finding really interesting things, like video from, like super revealing video of Laura Kunzberg from the BBC interviewing kind of like this Oslo Freedom School, like a school for revolution, where they're like, let's overthrow Hong Kong. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, what am I watching? And I start going to my friends, right? Being like, guys, look at what I found. And I found just not a lot of receptiveness, right? Like, not, people are not eager to kind of like be like, oh, like that's super awesome. You found a video of Rabia Kadir's granddaughters on like doing a tour of Xinjiang, showing that it's like a super nice city, and like they're kind of like just bougie girls in China. I don't care about that. Like I've heard the story of horror in that region, and that's all I care about. Like, I don't want to see any of your videos. I don't want to see any of the past testimony. I don't want to see any Uyghur letters. I don't want to see anything. I have my narrative, and I want to stick with it. And one thing that kept coming up, especially from my left-leaning Canadian friends, was that, like, you know what? Like, we did it. We had residential schools. Therefore, what China's doing is bad. And I'm like, that logic does not track. Like, you cannot accuse other countries of the crimes you yourself are guilty of just to kind of like flatten the playing field and then feel good about yourself. Because I feel like to a large degree, that's what happens in the Canadian context. Like, Canadians feel a lot of guilt, rightfully so, about the residential school system. But then instead of like really kind of like becoming really involved in reparations or some kind of movement like that, the way they deal with it, and again, I don't want to get too psychological because again, this is not my area of expertise, but like there's like a collective sentiment of like, if everyone else is terrible, even worse than we are, suddenly that does kind of like assuage a lot of the guilt. That's at any rate what I have experienced when trying to discuss this with a lot of people. It's they immediately pivot to, I don't care what anything you have to say. It's residential schools bad. China worse than Canada. You know, we have a chance to do it right now. And I'm like, this is completely, I don't know. It's kind of a conversation ender, and I've thought a lot about like how to maybe approach it in a different way. But it is what it is. I don't know. What do you all say about that? Do you experience the same?
Yeah, I really feel that. I mean, I think both me and you ended up interacting with Gabrielle Massey, who is like a co-chair of the Young New Democrats, and like we both dealt with him in the sense that like I think we both try to go in good faith, right? Basically had the evidence. I basically brought up the Zhanjing article, basically that William wrote, which had extensive research on the issue, along with the gray zone pieces as well. You brought your thread in. I believe, I can't remember his exact words, but I got the essence of it was, I don't care about the thread. And then basically he seemed to just ignore what I had said, reference a Communist Party of India statement that kind of corroborated his beliefs, and then basically posted a Jacobin article, basically totally ignoring all the pieces of information we put in front of him, basically the next day, which is, and I mean, I've seen it a whole bunch. It's definitely like a trend in terms of the propaganda barrier is something that's remarkably strong and not well understood along, I'd say like the socialist left and the communist left, I'd say, has like a decent idea of this, but I would say like especially the social democratic left has an extremely poor idea of this, bar a few kind of burgeoning individuals, I would say. And so as a result, it's I definitely have found it to be like a frustrating kind of issue dealing with them. Like there's some levels of imperialism where it's blatantly obvious, like you think Bolivia, think Israeli apartheid, where yeah, they're gonna clue into it. but basically there's some of them where like you put the evidence in front of them, you do that, they can't dispute your sources, but it doesn't matter. It's just false because they think it's false.
Well, actually, I want to step in and say one small thing that I think, having lived or having still like a lot of my social life in Peru and in South America, I
Yeah.
would actually challenge that point a little bit. I found that Peruvians, for example, a lot of Peruvians are more receptive to to having their narrative of China challenged than to having their narrative of Bolivia challenged.
Oh, I was talking about Canada, but go on.
Right. But I'm just saying, of course. But what I'm trying to say is that there's an interesting dynamic there, where like Peruvians that don't really have a dog in the China fight, so to speak, like they're like, oh, China, could be good, whatever. Like they're actually pretty open to hearing stuff about China. But then when you confront them with stuff about Bolivia, or especially Venezuela and especially Cuba, they shut down, because this is like a real North Star of their political orientation, where they are, right? And then in the Canadian context, it's flipped. In the Canadian context, you can talk about Bolivia, you can talk about Venezuela, even you can talk about Fidel Castro, like the Trudeau-Castro relationship, whatever. You can actually like talk about Cuba in a much nicer way. And this is what leads me to believe that we need to be very intelligent about how we approach these things. Like obviously people are shutting down. Obviously having the right facts on your satchel is not gonna win you. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's difficult to make headway. And this is why I like all this like news outlets popping up. Like you're doing the Canada Files, we got Venezuela Analysis, Plan A magazine. Like a lot of things, at least have popped up in my radar, of a lot of people trying out different tacks. You know what I mean? And I like that a lot. But yeah, it's interesting. What does it take? I don't know. I really don't know.
Joe, basically William, thoughts on this?
It's a very interesting phenomena where the Western left, they accept all the bad things that the U.S. State Department, Pompeo and company, and now Blinken and company say about China. But at the same time, they're skeptical about everything else that comes out of the U.S. State Department. But on China, they eat it all up. So that's a very interesting phenomenon that is happening.
Yeah, I see it as a reward system. If you're, I think there's more. If you look at Western media, they'll allow some people, especially in Europe, they seem to be even more in Europe. Like I've noticed in the UK, people will be very flamboyant about calling themselves even communist. There's this woman in the UK, Ash Sarkar from Novara Media. Yeah, she's quite old. She likes to play erratically. I'm a communist. She even told this pundit, really high profile guy, Piers Morgan, says I'm a communist, you idiot, or something. She's really, but when it comes right down to issues that really challenge empire, like Assange or your NATO or just foreign policy, Syria, Syria especially. I mean, foreign policy issues, they always fold, right? And they just echo whatever the prevailing, like you said, they think up basically progressive reasons to get behind what Mike Pompeo says, basically, And if you look in the media, there's always some kind of angle where they market an intervention to people from that'll appeal to the right, but then they'll also try to do it from a left-wing perspective. They'll play up the fact, for instance, like Juan Guaido, his party, Voluntad Popular, was part of the Socialist International, right? Which is pretty meaningless, right? Because they have all kinds of reactionary parties that are part of that. But people were playing that up and say, no, he's actually left. So it's a way to say, okay, if you're like a Fox News viewer, we'll give you this angle. But okay, if we want to get the so-called leftists on board with regime change in Venezuela, then we'll go at it from another angle. We'll market them in a left-wing way. So there's always and it seems like if you want to have some kind of promise, if you want to get invited on BBC regularly or things like that, you can be the kind of leftist who you have to be the kind of leftist who goes along with the empire. You know, has to go along with. Of course, I have to denounce China. You know, now, recent years. Before you could stay quiet about it because nobody, you know, like you said, it was quietly humming, and it wasn't on the radar, right? And the same kind of thing happens all the time. Like in 2011, I remember leftists were really concerned, like, oh my God, how are we going to stop Gaddafi from perpetrating a massacre in Benghazi? You know, if you asked them even a month before, where's Benghazi? Nobody would have a clue where Benghazi was anywhere in the world, right? But all of a sudden it became their huge priority to prevent a massacre by Gaddafi in Benghazi. And then a year later, Gaddafi's overthrown, the country's gone to hell, and Benghazi was actually being bombed from the air by the people backed by NATO, and nobody
led by
nobody
Canada, led by
had
Canada.
the sense of urgency about it. Yeah, so it's like it just overnight they can flip the switch, and then there's all kinds of pressure on everybody, including people on the left. They feel pressured, like, okay, I got to denounce China now because suddenly the same happened with Putin, right? I mean, probably the worst thing Putin ever did were in the early 90s when he was bombing, Chechnya. But at that time, he was in the good books of the Western powers, so it was really not a big deal.
You have a peer at FAIR, at Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting,
Right.
who coined a term that I love. Adam Johnson. I don't know if he coined it, but it's the first time. Adam Johnson said the condemnation racket is a condemnation racket. It's if you condemn, either you condemn and then you're like in the good graces, or you're out. You know what I mean? Like, we're gonna run you out of business, right? And I love that term. The condemnation racket is fantastic.
Yeah.
But so just to push the conversation in a certain direction, I've been thinking a lot about like how do we get out of this condemnation racket, right? Like, because like media comes, starts demonizing a country, and I think there's a fairly big tendency to always be on the defensive, which is they didn't do it. I have proof that they didn't do this, they didn't do that. Here's a good denial. Here's a good debunk.
I'm signing off. Sorry, I'm signing off random now, Aidan.
Signing off?
You can see me now?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I can see you. Let me quickly...
I'm using my mobile.
Cool.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay.
Sure.
So what I wanted to say is that I think what I don't see the left, I don't really like the term the left. I prefer kind of like Marxist, Leninist, communist, whatever. But like, what I don't see us doing a lot is setting the terms of the conversation. Like, I think we're in a treadmill, and like a new issue drops, and like everybody just, talk about the new issue. Oh, new issue drops, and we talk about the new issue. Oh, new issue dropped, and we talked about the new issue. And I think one thing I don't even know if I would blame us for it, because I don't know if we have the resources to do it, but we rarely set the terms of the conversation. Again, to cite very positively FAIR, because I think it's a fantastic publication, by the way. I just love FAIR. But Joshua Cho has written a bunch of very good articles that they do take the focus of debunking, but they go further into kind of like a fair bit of like praise for what has been done so far in China. It's kind of like, it's not just like China didn't lie. It's actually China reported all these things to all these countries around. And it's that kind of thing, when you start speaking positively about another country, that at least I found Canadians get, that upsets Canadians a little bit. It's kind of like, you're saying China's better than Canada? What? Like, China's got this over Canada? No way. Like, you start talking about, like, I think we should do a lot more positive kind of bringing up perks of like, talk about Cuba positively rather than reply to the next smear coming. Like, you know what I mean? Like, setting the terms of the conversation, setting the pace of the conversation. I think that's one thing that I hope, with a proliferation of media outlets, perhaps we at some point can start doing that, right?
I agree. It's true. It's a lot. It's, when you're up against the dominant players, it's very hard to. You will, to some extent, always get led by the nose by them. They'll say, okay, we got to destroy this country. Okay, so we got to go defend that country. Well, okay, now we're going to go destroy this other one. So that you're getting, partially that's just because they're more powerful than we are. That's just a fact.
Yeah, so that's just a fact.
But I do think we can do better in terms of making positive proposals. And one person I really like, who's always has positive ideas about things, actual proposals, is Dean Baker at CPER. He's been talking forever about the idea of government supplied media vouchers so that people can to democratize access to media, and had ideas about how to break up the big tech giants, and stuff like that. So I mean, if you have proposals like that, it seems people, because I noticed like a lot of debate online recently with Trump getting his Twitter account taken away and all his other social media, and people are, and I agree, they're very concerned about this power of the tech giants. Say, wait a second, we're going to applaud this? I mean, you just applauded a bunch of billionaires who nobody elected deciding to shut down the president of the United States. No, even, he basically, my opinion, he made a coup attempt. I mean, a farcical one, but it was still an attempt to overturn the results of the election using violence. So in my opinion, that's a coup attempt. But regardless, you can make arguments for shutting him down, but it's very alarming that the tech giants do this. So part of the left gets on this thing where like they're saying, they seem to want to talk only about that aspect of it. But what about a positive proposal? Say, okay, what's the alternative to how do we go about breaking them apart? I think we could do more of that, like have ideas, concrete proposals, as opposed to just no censorship. That's kind of vague.
Yeah,
for sure.
Like
I just wanted to jump in, right? Just because something big has just come up, and I saw this tweet from Tom Foudy. I sent it to you guys in the chat, but and I'll link it to people in the chat here as well. So basically, the essence of it now is that following obviously a little while after Trump was suspended, Twitter has lost the official count for the Chinese embassy to the U.S. after a post which obviously defended China's policies in the Xinjiang region. So I guess my immediate question would be reactions to this.
Well, I treat my Twitter, like I see a lot of people brand building on Twitter, and of course that's not my job, so I don't have to concern myself in that way. But I see Twitter as essentially hostile territory. Like I've been trying to like port my threads and all my content away from Twitter so that I don't, like, it's eventually going to shut everything down. Like I take it as a foregone conclusion. Like, yes, like Twitter, that's one thing that annoyed me about the reaction to the Trump ban is that people acted as if like, oh, they broke a barrier of like, I was like, they've been doing this forever. Like they've been just blocking, banning, eliminating people, especially on the left forever. Before I took to Twitter, I spent more time than I wanted, and I don't really enjoy it, but like I spent a bunch of time on Reddit, and they always did the thing, right? We're like, oh, we're gonna ban some fascist sub. We're going to need to ban an equal number of left-wing subs, even if there's no correlation whatsoever. So yes, I think this is like very hostile territory. But what do? I think we're already, at least as far as what our contribution to Twitter is, the fact that there's been analysis, the fact that there's FAIR, the fact that there's the Canada files, like this is good. I think this is good that hopefully people will be able to kind of like rebuild these networks outside of the centralized kind of like infrastructure that Twitter offers. I don't think there's anything we can do other than that. Like Twitter is just gonna clamp down, and I think there's nothing we can do about it. I mean, I don't want to be cynical or pessimistic, but that's how I feel about it.
I'm not on Twitter, but did they say why they're banning China?
The Chinese embassy account?
No, the Chinese embassy account.
Yeah, I mean,
because they were too critical of the U.S.
Yeah, I think it was of the U.S. smears towards Xinjiang in terms of the region.
Oh, so I see. It's part of the.
It was for defending Chinese policy.
Yeah, so. Yeah. You have to boycott the Xinjiang products, and I guess the Chinese embassy is a product of that as well. Okay. But Twitter is you can't get Twitter in China, so I don't think the Chinese really care.
This is another thing. People always frame it as like, why are you defending China? And I'm like, China can take care of itself. Like, I'm not doing this for China. Like, China does not need some random engineering guy to go on Twitter and defend China. What I'm trying to do is to get Canadians to stop self-sabotaging, closing all doors, and just sitting down and complaining that nothing can get done because either, like, we cannot move in any direction, because if we move in that direction, it's like China, and if we move in the other direction, it's like the United States. So we just sit down and like wait till everything decays. I think this kind of like the purpose of anti-China propaganda is not only to demonize China and like target China as an economic rival, but it's also to ensure that nobody in North America gets any ideas, right? Like,
well, can I just bring up another point, because the effects of demonizing China for Asian Canadians is quite serious.
Oh, you're right. Yes.
The demonization of China goes hand in hand with racist attacks against Chinese Canadians.
Hmm.
Because if you have a strong China that is friendly with the Canadian government, then the demonization is not as strong as today when the Canadian government denounces China at all turns in terms of human rights, in terms of COVID, in terms of trade, in terms of whatever else you can think of. And so I know when I was younger, China was in very bad shape. And so the sick man of Asia, well, not that far back, but if you're the sick man of Asia, then if you're Chinese here in Canada, if you're Chinese Canadian, then you're the sick man of Canada or whatever. So there are serious repercussions
Absolutely.
to the demonization. I just want to say that.
And
It's totally reasonable. Actually, I want to jump in again because obviously last week I had Abram Lutz, and he discussed part of New Brunswick Education Minister Dominic Carty. So I'll give the short of it. Essentially, he was the director of this regime change NGO within Nepal from like 2005, 2008, but he worked for them since 2001, right? Essentially, he worked to basically block the rise of the Maoists, who ended up winning anyways. He failed miserably. There's whole WikiLeaks cables that I cited using this. But he ended up actually coming back to Canada. He was a centrist hack. He won the New Brunswick leadership for the NDP, was there for a few years. Then he went to the Conservatives, right? And he became education minister after winning a seat in the provincial parliament. And so basically soon after this, now he started a campaign to actually destroy the connection to the Confucius Institutes in Canada. Now you've had the targeting of Confucius Institutes in basically America for quite a long time, but you also really have the case, right, where New Brunswick basically under Carty, basically they don't get sued by China, so they're not going to fully stop till 2022, right? But Carty described it as Chinese propaganda. You have this kind of rampant xenophobia that went on. Even in Quebec a few years earlier, basically without really any proof at all, police basically, the CSIS basically went and harassed a Confucius Institute basically connected to, I think it was Seneca. If I can find the article, I'll let you know, but it was somewhere in Quebec. And so basically you have like a real tendency, and I think of what William said really well, this having a real world impact, this xenophobia, it's quite scary. So I guess basically I asked maybe William or basically maybe Joe, if you'd be comfortable talking a little bit about the Confucius Institutes. Obviously not too long, we'll talk about other things, but just to give people a little more context.
Okay, just briefly, I have a lot of friends who send their kids to the Confucius Institute on Saturdays to learn Chinese. So it does provide a service to the community. The Confucius Institute, if you take the politics out of it, and the politics is mainly coming from people who are opposed to the Confucius Institute and opposed to any Chinese government entities, because the Confucius Institute is no different from the Goethe Institute, the German, and there's one here in Montreal where you go in there to learn German and read German books. And I think there's also a French related to the l'Académie Française. I don't know the name of that. But anyway, various countries around the world, they have these so-called institutes in order to project their culture in the foreign countries, and that's essentially what the Confucius Institute does. So you may want to demonize it as an arm of the Chinese Communist Party. And so I think in Toronto, there was some movement to ban the Confucius Institute out of the school system. But I think there's still one going on in Montreal at Dawson College. Correct me if I'm wrong, Roderic. But
yeah, I think it might be Dawson College.
Yeah, Dawson College. Yeah. Okay.
I have just one brief comment. If it's a bit going back to what we were talking about earlier with William, but
yeah, sure. I think we've some reason. Yep, go on.
Frozen, or I don't know if it's like a lull in the conversation or whether maybe it froze a little bit. I'm not sure.
No, I was just saying go on. I think William froze up for a second, so the feed. So just go on.
I find it absolutely, again, just trying to work through the logic, combing over it carefully. I find it really upsetting and frustrating how China went directly from poor Chinese people, oh, they're working in factories, oh, it's so sad, we need to save them from the Communist Party. And then like one poll comes out and it's like Chinese people are doing well, they're proud of the government, they're doing okay, they're happy, and immediately like there's no intermediate stage where we're like, oh, poor them, oh, I'm happy for them, oh, I'm upset at them. It's like immediately they went from victim to being like the worst perpetrators of like the worst atrocity. Like I think this is like I don't know how to grapple with it at like a geopolitical like resources level, because it feels like such a psychological thing that people can't treat that country normally. It has to be the victim, or it has to be like a huge horror. You know what I mean?
Well, the worst are those on the left, because I have friends, ex-comrades, I might call them, and they went to China in the 70s and the 80s, and they fell in love with China. And then they went to China again in the 2000s, and then they come back and says, oh, it's terrible here. No, the last time we were there, people were riding bicycles everywhere. People they were all the same. It was egalitarian. Everybody was poor. Today, people have cars and so on and so forth. And so this is the amazing thing. To build socialism, you have to be poor. If you're rich, then there's no way a country can build socialism. But what is the point of socialism? The point of socialism is to have welfare, to take care of the cultural and the material needs of the people. And so they can't see that. They can't get past their idealistic utopian socialism. And this is the thing that really burns me, because and I try to talk to these friends and say, oh, they built these phantom apartments. We were there, we saw that nobody was living in those apartments. But 5 years later, there's a whole big community around those empty apartments, because the Chinese do not build for the immediate. They have a long-term plan. They know that there will be people who will be needing housing, in the next 5 to 10 years. So, but where's the thinking? Where's the thinking of these so-called leftists?
I could not agree more. Like, I just could not agree more with that. Like, people have this idea that socialism is kind of like generalized poverty and stuff like that. And I'm like, where? Again, I came to socialism late. I was a left liberal for the longest time. But then I ended my studies in engineering, started reading a lot of this stuff. And I'm like, it's a rich theory. They're talking, like, socialists throughout history are talking about like taking control of destiny, like building up society, building up the productive force. Like there's disagreements. There's lots of stuff in there, but it's a rich theory of developing society. It's not just like a mantra of like, it's just gonna be egalitarian poverty and that's it. It's like, no, that's not it. So it is very frustrating seeing people switch immediately from Chinese people as victims to Chinese people as enemies without like for a second seeing them really as people, as like other citizens of the world. You know what I mean? I think that's, I saw it from a different perspective, William. I saw it from kind of like the Western white perspective. And I saw the exact same thing you did. And it's just like, it's horrifying. I think, I don't know what else to say about it. It's just horrifying. I really don't like it.
And at the same time, the Chinese lifted 800 million people out of extreme poverty. So what can you say?
Yeah, I think part of what that represents too, on some level, on the Western left, is their own impotence, because the left is so weak in richer countries, especially, that they're very susceptible to demonize any government that's actually in power. I think that's part of the reason why so many tend to go along with like demonization of. Well, if you mentioned the coup in Bolivia, right? I mean, there were actually leftists who came out with these just ridiculous statements trying to justify the coup in Bolivia, because Morales was in power. How can somebody in power actually be good? We're the left in like Canada. We're pretty weak. We're weak, extremely weak. We have no power, so we identify with anybody who's on the left anywhere in the world who's out of power. They must be telling you the truth, and we fall for that kind of thing, So I think I think it's our input. It's annoying to me, because our primary responsibility is to prevent our own governments from hurting other people, and Canada is so complicit with hurting Venezuelans and Haitians and Bolivians as well. They went along with the coup in Bolivia as well.
Peruvians, or Canadian mining companies, huge
exactly.
in Peru.
Exactly. So that's our responsibility, not to lecture governments that are actually in power doing something, doing some good things, and trying to find excuses to get on board with Pompeo and Trump and Biden, whoever happens to be in the White House, and get on board with their analysis to help bring them down, instead of just saying, what could we do to prevent our governments from hurting people? That's our responsibility.
That's a tremendous point, Joe, and I really want to just support what you're saying there, because it's one of the biggest things that the West left is we do have to admit that we're not at a point of large strength, and I think basically getting to starting to be engaged within the Communist Party, and I should be officially a member of the Young Communist League soon. I'm beginning to see and being able to get to see some of those structures in person, and there's effort there, but it's going to take time to build. It's going to take time to build, and eventually it'll face repression. And so basically, in the meantime, we have to just really, as you said, got to work hard. We got to basically debunk a lot of these myths, and we also got to go on the offensive, really, which I think we've all respectively tried to do, in actually not only just demonstrating how society isn't bad, basically social societies, actually existing social societies, but also demonstrating their successes, and basically demonstrating why people should support them, not just when a government's trying to overthrow them, which I mean is basically all the time. So I guess it's synonymous basically, but I hope you get my point there. Yeah, it's just I'll dish it off to you guys because I'll be rambling at that point, but I just couldn't support Joe's point really anymore.
I've been I feel like I'm just a reader guy. I just read. I like reading articles, and even Twitter I was a little bit hesitant to get into because I was like, oh, it's so the auto scroll and things just flying around. I like long reads. But I really I think there was a whole craze with this thing called BreadTube, where a lot of YouTubers, mostly with anarchistic and social democratic tendencies, went to YouTube and started pumping out a lot of videos. And insofar they criticized capitalism, it was pretty good. But then of course a lot of it turned into we are, you need to be an anarchist, social democrat, whatever. And it soured. I soured pretty quickly on it. But I do like what I, at least from my perspective, seems to be like quite a large explosion of creativity as to how to approach this issue. I think it's important to think that the rate of improvement, the rate of acceptance of people, of socialist ideas, communist ideas, and so on and so forth, is going to accelerate. And things will eventually, we shouldn't only plan in the short term, but also plan I like that when parties have a good program, that it's not just a temporary kind of this works for now, but it's kind of seeing into the future, right? And I think a lot of people are asking questions. A lot of people, the nicest thing about Twitter by far is when people DM you with questions. They just send you like a polite, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I don't want to like disturb you, but like, can I ask you a clarification question?" I'm like, "Yo, like, extremely happy. This is the only reason I'm here." Like, and I think people are asking questions. People are not satisfied with the answers they're getting in the mainstream. They're not satisfied with the answers that were taught in school. So I do think there's like I think even just doing that, just being there and offering people an alternative answer that isn't more of liberalism and certainly isn't the fascist answer, I think that's important. And it could, and people just come up with the most creative things. You teach them something, you tell them something, and they kind of like reinterpret it. And then they're like, "Oh, do you mean this?" And it's like, that's a way nicer way of putting it than I could have ever come up with. And that process happening over and over, I think, is what causes a message to spread, like sometimes wildly. Without, I'm kind of hoping that more of that happens, because things are, sadly, they're getting worse, right? But at the same time, things, that also means that people have more questions, have better questions, have more impetus to do more. So I'm a little bit optimistic. I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing to say, but I'm a little bit optimistic.
Yeah.
I mean,
Go ahead.
No, go on. I didn't have, just go on now.
I would just say, I think it's better to be optimistic and be wrong than to be pessimistic and right. You know, it's more value actually in being optimistic, in my opinion. And also, I think what matters also is money. You know, with regards to media, is people getting paid? You know, because like a lot of the work the last stuff I've written for many years, I was never getting paid until I started writing for Telesur. Until everything collapsed there with the economy in Venezuela. But they were actually paying, people are getting paid to write a little bit. And sometimes I get paid a little bit to write. Are you paid a little bit to write for FAIR? Or, there are other outlets out there that pay people to write. And I think that's very important. Money matters. I think what happens a lot of times with alternative media is they splinter into so many different projects, you know, that there's just a plethora of people you could donate to. And it's hard to, we have limited resources, right? So it's hard to sustain all these different outlets. So it's very important, I think, that we get government money there's the idea that Robert McChesney and Dean Baker's been pushing forever. And it basically says that governments should give every voter a fixed amount of money that they can devote towards any non-commercial outlet of their choice. It's basically a voucher, right? So that way you can even with like $100 or $200 voucher, you could quickly get real money to alternative media. And because it's each voter independently basically owns this little piece of money that they can donate to media, what that means is there's an independence. You know, it doesn't have to go to left media or right media, but it has to be the non-commercial media. So the idea is to get money so that you don't have to, otherwise you're basically depending on a charity model. You know, so a lot of these alternative outlets, even when they don't take money from, which is good, you know, they don't take money from governments or big corporations, but sometimes there's still a big money bags behind the screen, you know, big donors who exert a lot of influence. So it's very important that we think about alternative ways to actually fund and sustain people who are doing writing and not media analysis and all kinds of research, because it keeps people going.
For sure. I mean, you brought up a really great bunch of sentiments, and I mean, that's been kind of like a major thought for me. I guess especially recently. I mean, it was the kind of thing where I just basically started up and I didn't even bother setting up Patreon for the Canada Files until like late February, so like 4 or 5 months into the project, when I realized it might actually be able to go somewhere. And then a personal Patreon wasn't really set up until like maybe like September. So I admittedly didn't even think about the financials and stuff like that for a while starting on. But like as I've gone on and as I've gone to these things, like basically I guess I've been fortunate in a sense, because of the work I've done. Basically I've been able to make some connections, and I'm slowly finding places where I could write and maybe get paid once in a while. But it really is far and in between. And I think like the media democracy model, basically Joe mentioned, is a great idea. Yeah, so I guess in some, I've at least, I can say I've at least, like, there's been some potential discussions with Telsur. Now, there's nothing confirmed for sure, but I might have a connection there, which I think I would enjoy a ton.
Who is that?
Really, obviously they're still basically rebuilding financially from the hit, but they've been able to kind of resustain some stuff a little bit, so they're doing a bit better. But yeah, no, I mean, like, that's the thing for me, is it's something that's constantly on my mind as well, as like someone who's writing, and also someone who's running a site who wants to be able to pay people eventually. Basically, it's a tough biz to get into, and I've definitely found like the left media sphere has not been so cooperation happy. I found like the Harbinger media network has been pretty good. Obviously, unfortunately, they already had podcast networks and enough people in there already, so the Canada Files wasn't able to jump into that. So maybe something like that happens in, I don't know, March or April. But like, they've been one of the few that's been open. Passage, something nearly happened in like last August, but then it just I kind of got ghosted. They got really busy, and so basically nothing ever happened there. And basically I reached out, and it wasn't happening because they stretched themselves too far, right? Which, I mean, I'm not gonna hate on them for that. I mean, they took a lot of ambitious tasks on, but you know, stuff happens sometimes. But point being, I found it really, really difficult to cooperate. I mean, like, Canadian Dimension especially, like, I wrote once for them, pitched once or twice, didn't get that accepted. But basically, when I tried to, like, with the Canada Files, host a few events, right, from the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, basically they just became, like, especially like the editor Harrison Semper, became just like really toxic, and like basically it was just kind of nasty. Like, there's some things where, like, obviously I'm not perfect in the running of the site, like basically if there's little issues or little things, like I have no issue with critiques. Like, I'm literally like someone who's a year and a half to a Bachelor of Journalism program. Like, basically I've managed to do a lot of cool stuff, but the part of the reason why I'm here is because you guys have literally failed to cut, like, you guys, but like, I mean, even like left media have failed to cover foreign policy. I'm not here because I'm some sort of super genius. I'm decent, I think, at what I do, and it's just not covered. And so in general, getting off on my little tangent, basically, I've just found the left media sphere to not be that cooperative, really, to be honest there. It seems like a lot of them are concerned more about their own back than they are about building the kind of bigger picture, which I think is really self-defeating, because I think the only way you're actually going to build a strong left is actually going to be, quite frankly, I think a lot of I think basically you have to understand there's obviously differences on the left, as Roderic would know terrifically well. Like, you're not going to have an anarchist and like a news network and the Canada Files go together. That would go up in fucking flames in like 30 seconds, basically. But like, if you have like multiple networks that are similar, even like multiple social democrat kind of things merging, or like multiple socialist things, basically papers and stuff merging, if another few come up in Canada, basically, like, that's the kind of thing we need to start to do and start to seriously consider. We do need to like consolidate a little bit and try to put things together, because look, at the end of the day, the job of left media is to help build like these social movements. I think that kind of my consciousness was built on that when I saw the work of Coalition News in Bolivia and how much of a direct impact that can have. But William has his hand up. So William, pop on in. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say that, Aidan, I'm really impressed with your work. You know, you're a very young person. You're studying, and you're still playing Pokemon. That's my son's Pokemon. So I'm really impressed with what you're doing and the amount of time that you're spending on this. But don't get discouraged, because within the
I'm not. Don't worry. Yeah.
Within the mainstream left, you'll never get acceptance, because the mainstream left have their own agenda, and their agenda is not to wage any revolutionary change. They want to be within the status quo. They want to go to parliament. They want to be accepted. They want to get the Order of Canada. So that's the mainstream left. And Canadian Dimension I've had run-ins with them. I've submitted articles to them in the past, and they've always turned me down. And once in a while, I'm surprised that they've printed some articles, I guess, maybe by you or by Yves Anglais. But other than that, I would consider Canadian Dimension to be part of the mainstream left, like the NDP, like Democratic Socialists of America, and all the Eurocentric left that is there. And all of these people, they get together into what they might call a socialist international, whatever they call themselves. I think they have some kind of an international. And these are the people that lead the charge against real socialist countries like China, Cuba, Vietnam. So I think, as long as we're able to do what we're doing, I think that that's great. And Aidan, keep up the good work.
Thank you. It's quite kind words from someone who's done quite a lot. So much on the activism and writing front. So
I was going to say,
yep.
like, I've been asked to join, kind of like a few people have asked me to join podcasts, and I was like, oh, I don't know. Then I was like, okay, you're putting a lot of effort. Like, the website is really good. I was like, okay, you know what? I'll just jump in. I'm very nervous about it, but like, I want to support what people are doing. And I think you're doing a good job too. I even like that there's so many translate. I don't know if it's automatically translated or not, but I was like, damn, you got a lot of translations on your articles. It's impressive. I was going to say, it is tricky. How can I put this? I wouldn't get too, I'm not saying you are resentful, but for example, one of my earliest experiences on Twitter, around the time that I started subtitling those videos, is I had like this pretty horrible clash with one of my journalistic heroes, which is Aidan Jonah. Like, I asked him, yo, like, when are you gonna make a China episode? And like he apparently felt that I had been too insistent on this, and just like completely blocked, and like I was a Patreon supporter, and I was like, what's happening? And then I complained a little bit, and then one of the Chapo guys put me on blast. So I was like, look at this whiny guy, like he's whining because he said something. And it was just, I was at work, and I was like, my phone is blowing up because all people are reacting to this, and I'm like, what's happening? But I think we're all growing in like, I don't know, how can I put this? Like, I still think Aidan Jonah is doing absolutely fantastic work. Like, I still recommend his work to people all the time. And I think you keep doing the work you're doing, and I think eventually people are going to start coming around to certain opinions, right? Like, I've been listening to Alberta Advantage, which I would say is, in my opinion, the best Canadian podcast, flat out. Like, I just think they're doing absolutely fantastic work. I think they're just absolutely fantastic. They build themselves as like very Alberta-centric. They build themselves as very Alberta-centric, but they're actually just kind of talking about all Canadian issues. And they're, as far as I can tell, they're not very denominational. But you can see kind of like just the care with which they do research and what they're trying to do. And I find that, like, yeah, like, I've changed my opinion about certain things. They've changed my opinion about certain things. I think we're all coming around to a lot of the same conclusions, right? And I think that's exciting. I think there's a lot of, everyone's doing a lot of learning. This, like, a lot of people come and like, hey, how long have you been reading Marx, Lenin, whatever? And I'm like, I started like 2 years ago or 3 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, people are coming around to this text. They're new. I think everyone is learning pretty fast. So I'm, once again, not to be too cheesy, but like, I'm a little bit optimistic. Like, I think a lot of people are coming around to the same conclusions. Maybe this is just like my naivete or something, but yeah, I don't know, just nice sentiments. I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you. I mean, just so I want to, being the host, I want to be a little responsible here. Shifting the focus now, let's stick on the good news theme. In a sense, I'd say. I mean, I think, Roderic, you're uniquely positioned to talk about this. The Lima Group, it's kind of, member countries are kind of starting to go up in flames a little bit, in the sense that the capitalism is kind of starting to be questioned, really. Would you be comfortable on just talking about that? And I mean, Joe, I think, would be well suited to talk about that as well. So
I can speak a little bit about that. One of the consequences of my political awakening happening in Canada, as opposed to Peru, where I was just kind of just following along, is that I'm actually more knowledgeable about some other regions than about Latin America. I would say I know of maybe even more about Bolivian politics than about Peruvian politics at points or in certain verticals. However, we had like a constitutional crisis in Peru recently, and as you say, I wouldn't say the country went up in flames, but the police killed.
Oh no. I was talking about more generally. Yeah.
No,
As
but
the
I want
whole-
to contextualize it. I want to make it more general. Going from the specific. And the problem I find with a country like Peru, and I don't know exactly, I think it applies also to Colombia, to Ecuador, to a lot of the countries in South America, is that there is, especially in Peru, because of the Shining Path, which was like a Maoist insurgency that splintered off from the Communist Party of Peru. There is just this kind of like both sides bad. Like both sides bad permeates the politics of the country to such a degree that even it's almost like no matter how much the reigning order is hated, it's almost equally met with a rejection of anything that smells of socialism. This is changing. I'm witnessing it change. Patria Roja is starting to like make some inroads. We got some good candidates, stuff like that. But it's I'm being optimistic about things. Somehow I feel like things getting worse in South America for some reason doesn't seem to be having the same responses. I don't know. Joe, what do you think about this? I don't know if you feel similarly.
Exactly. In what way? What do you mean?
Like, so Aidan mentioned like a lot of countries in the Lima group having difficulties going up in flames.
Oh,
yeah. Like I'm like, I somehow, for some reason, this is not necessarily, or maybe it's because the wave of elections doesn't come. Maybe we'll have another pink tide, but it's a little bit murky. Like,
right.
It's weird. It's weird.
They were pretty much going. I mean, that's pretty much true. I mean, there were massive protests in Chile. In fact, they won they were forced, the protests eventually forced the government to concede that they will have a constituent assembly convened to rewrite the constitution, because they're basically under Pinochet's constitution, which is quite amazing. That we're in 2020 and they're still under Pinochet's constitution. So they won that battle, and of course, just the generalized brutality of the police forces there, that was seen everywhere through the region, and then that followed with there were massive protests in Haiti, and there at the same time that the protests were going on in Hong Kong, there were major protests in it was Chile, Ecuador, and Haiti, and they involved something like nearly 100 deaths in those protests over like a 3-month period. And there was an article on Fair this by Alan McLeod. And at the same time, the protests in Hong Kong were going on. I think there were like 2 deaths or something, or it was
there's like 2 deaths, and none of them by the cops. There's one guy got killed because some guy threw a brick at him. Like there was 1 death on the pro-government side, so to speak. No deaths of students, as far as I can tell.
Right. So you look at the deaths from the protests, they were far more lethal in Latin America at the same time. It was like a controlled experiment, except it wasn't a controlled experiment. You had these lethal protests, and even in Chile, in Ecuador too, even when they weren't killed, a lot of people were losing eyes because they were deliberately being targeted by the cops to put their eyes out. And yet the media coverage in the New York Times, places like that, was exactly flipped. I mean, it was all the attention on the Hong Kong protests, and so that was going on in at the same time that so the Lima group was in a sense going up in flames, and at the same time Pompeo comes up with these statements, and Trump and those guys blaming Maduro in Venezuela, saying he's spreading unrest through the region, which was really stupid from their point of view, just from their imperialist point of view, to say Maduro's, to say we have him on the ropes, we're about to throw him out, and at the same time saying actually he's destabilizing all your allies in the region. It's contradictory message. He's either hopeless and on his way out, or he's actually winning battles all over the region, undermining your governments. It doesn't make sense.
The enemy is both strong and weak.
Yeah, both strong and weak, exactly. So there was a lot of contradictions were exposed then. But I think another important aspect of that is that it shows people in Venezuela and in Bolivia, elsewhere, is like, look, okay, you can capitulate to Washington if you want, but what are you going to get for it? You're just going to get nothing. You're going to be
Yeah.
you're going to get the kind of governments that are losing control over their own populations because their social orders are so ridiculously unfair that they're coming apart at the seams. So it really undermines the whole idea, for example, in Venezuela or elsewhere, that capitulating to Washington is the way to go. You're going to be fine if you do that. Well, no, you can look around and see, and with the pandemic, it became even more obvious, right? Because these governments are just, people actually coming back to Venezuela from from where they had fled because of the sanctions and the economic crisis. People coming back to Venezuela. So yeah, out of your Aidan, you're right. I mean, the Lima Group is coming apart at the seams, and also its own contradictions are so horrible. I mean, you have countries like there are countries that should be really labeled dictatorships. I mean, I don't use that term lightly, but Honduras, Haiti, Bolivia, and when it was under Áñez, those were indisputably dictatorships, and they were all part of the Lima Group, whose purpose is supposedly to bring democracy to Venezuela. I mean, it's such obvious contradictions. So the empire always runs into these, the Western countries always run into these just glaring contradictions, and they're hard to sustain. I mean, the media can do some papering over, but in the same, of course, with China. I mean, if you ever, it's almost comical. I'm drifting a bit, but a lot of the writing I've done is exposing how the NGOs, like especially Human Rights Watch, they're terrible. If you follow his
terrible
Ken Roth, the executive director of Human Rights Watch, he is absolutely aching to overthrow China's government, to demonize China's government. He's just obsessed with that. And one of the things he always talks about, he keeps trying, even now he's trying to blame China for the pandemic, when they've obviously handled it magnificently compared to the Western countries. And it's exact opposite. The Western countries actually pose a risk to the rest of the world because they're incubators for this virus. Yeah, so a lot, like you say, a lot of the propaganda often comes apart at the seams. Its own contradictions are so obvious that it does start to undermine itself. And we need media to point that out. And I know what you're saying, and you mentioned that, and I'll get back to this about the problems, the infighting and the toxicity, and I think that's everywhere in media. Any organization, you're going to have that to some extent. But I think that's why it's important to get significant funding so that readers have more control financially over these outlets. So the outlets at the end of the day have to produce content that's good, or the readers go elsewhere and the funding goes elsewhere. But too often it's even the alternative media, it relies on big foundations. So basically it relies still on rich people. You have to find some, like Democracy Now! Was heavily funded by this billionaire Patrick Lannon. So even though, because he has some, you find some rich people here and there who have progressive leanings, and they'll fund some of these outlets, but it's very dangerous because their limitations end up becoming everybody else's limitations. So we have to find a funding model that's much more sustainable and can encourage more healthy habits among these outlets.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. Like you think of like The Intercept, for example, like what's kind of the rot that's going on there. They obviously have like a billionaire owner, and they're desperately clawing for funds. Even though they have a billionaire owner, they basically have figures like, obviously someone like Greenwald is far from perfect, right? But he still did some terrific journalism, quite frankly. Like you think of Edward Snowden and Onwards and Onwards. And there's also another, I think it was co-founder or key figure in founding the outlet, basically got booted out protesting recent decisions in the outlet, which is just yet another example of basically when the rich and when the powerful kind of have these kind of influences over media, like it never ends well. Because like for me, like especially as a kind of a, I guess, publisher, it's a weird state basically of affairs, but I guess technically as a publisher of sorts, like I understand the logic of basically the appeal. Like it's like, damn, you could like make enough to live off of that. Basically, you could go there, you could do that. It's great. It's like, wow, this is terrific. And then reality hits when there's a topic they don't want you to go at, and it's like they threaten to pull the plug on it. Basically, you might stop. You might say, oh, we can just let this one thing go. But then the outlet can keep going, and then it keeps on happening and keeps on happening. And so it's just yet again that kind of the model of it being something community based, I think, is utterly crucial, because I don't think it ever is going to end well for like an for like a genuinely like socialist, anti-imperialist kind of network that's being run or owned basically financially by like any kind of really rich person.
Yeah, I just want to say that the Lima Group, as well as the OAS, the Organization of American States, and Canada's role in both of these, I think essentially Canada has been acting as the water boy for the Americans. And what the Americans can't say or don't want to say, because there's so much hatred against the gringos in South America, Canada steps up and speaks on behalf of the Americans and American policy. And so I think this is something that we need to expose. And what Canada did in regards to the Bolivian elections, last year's elections and this year's elections, it's just outrageous. That last year, even before the votes were counted, Canada supported the coup, and this year, I think it took Canada about 4 or 5 days, or a week, before it would recognize the government that was re-elected by how much? By about 80% of the vote. So you can see that Canada's role as the stooge of American imperialism in South America is something that we need to continue to expose.
For sure. And I mean, like, this was obviously pioneered, I would say, arguably under Freeland. That was basically when the Gray Zone revealed that America was very pleased and that Canada had adopted it, and America had a first agenda politically, right? And it's stretched on really from Freeland to Champagne, and now we have a new imperialist foreign minister, Stéphane Dion, I believe it is.
It's
who,
Mark Garneau.
Mark Garneau, geez. I wrote the article and I can't remember the name. Life's busy, eh? But yeah, I know, Mark Garneau. And like, funny enough, you'd think the guy is relatively safe enough. It's the nice astronaut guy who went to space. Cool. No. Everyone sucks. Not everyone sucks. But a lot of these like figures that are
weird love affair with their astronauts. Somebody said that on.
Yeah. Oh, geez. But yeah, no, like, I mean, since we're on the topic, I mean, I wrote about it recently. Like, he actively supported Ukrainian neo-Nazis. This guy was the foreign affairs critic for like a year before the liberals got into government. So I think this was like maybe 2014, 2015 period. So basically, obviously, he supported the Ukrainian neo-Nazis. He supported the training. He supported the weapons going to them, even though there's clear evidence that basically, these fascist militias, like, think of Azov Battalion as the main example, in parts of their battalions have literally committed pogroms and vicious assaults and attacks. Basically, they were integrated into the Ukrainian military formally. And then these weapons are flooded into Ukraine to fight the super scary Russian threat. And instead, we're just arming neo-Nazis, right? And that was Garneau. That was Garneau really supporting that. His role, and I didn't realize this until I researched the article, he laid the groundwork for this all. He laid the groundwork for the liberals' basically active support of these neo-Nazis. It was under him that they began to push that, and they began to push that really aggressively. And notably, even though he eventually became the transport minister, his imperialist narratives and imperialist bent, obviously, surprise, surprise, did not stop. Actually, it was Yvon Glaire who mentioned this to me, but basically, even as transport minister, basically, he joined Baird, basically, who's the foreign minister at the time of the Conservatives, at a pro-Israel rally. This was right around, basically, when, in 2014, when, obviously, when is Israel not bombing Palestine or Gaza, but they were bombing Gaza at the time. Basically, he went there before, and then basically, soon after, basically, he worked to basically, he continually would go visit, do the kind of propaganda tours of the Israeli apartheid state, And additionally, basically, they worked on transport agreements and such to basically help basically relations and build those further. So he's basically worked actively, right? And the crazy thing, right? He was named the co-chair of the Liberal Party's International Affairs Council of Advisors. So he's been an absolutely crucial figure on Liberal foreign policy. Every single foreign policy, like decision, action, like kind of general trend of the Liberal Party is like he is a key director in that focus. And he's someone that basically I don't think has gotten the attention he deserves. To be honest, like I'm kind of surprised no one else has kind of written about him. Because I mean, like Freeland, obviously, there was a Communist Party comrade, I think it was Alex Boykowitz, who kind of revealed this and it ended up getting written about. But it kind of went quiet until like, I mean, I actually wrote about it in June. It was June of last year, right? And then basically within a few weeks to a month, you had like Progress Report and Read Passage, and a bunch of these sites start to cover it. So I'm hoping that trend will follow basically, and they'll cover this and look at this because, like, he's dangerous. Garneau is dangerous. Like our political class. Yeah.
I fully agree. I fully agree with your appraisal, but I have one question. I followed all the releases on Chrystia Freeland, and I think the work that Alex Boykowitz did was excellent.
Yeah, obviously obviously.
But the only problem,
exactly like a thing that we started with first. So.
But the only problem is that, okay, she was exposed for all this stuff, and what were the consequences? There are no consequences, right?
Nothing.
I think, again, I think this is tricky. It's tricky because I'm not sure exactly what I'm saying here, but like I got persuaded of a lot of these ideas of anti-imperialism because of my deep concern for Bolivia, and like I've never not been bitter about. As a kid, I was kind of like, oh, Iraq war sounds like a good idea because I was an idiot. So I never got over that. I was always mad about that. But I think a reality, a hard reality we need to accept is that a lot of people don't care about anything like around them. So we need to do one of two things. We need to either explain things in terms of their own local interests, or make them care, like explain to them why they should care so that they start caring. But I think a little bit of a problem with what's happening right now is that there's a lot of exposés about like all this horror that's happening, but there's like, you could expose, people keep having this idea that like you expose things, right? Like the movie, so many movies end with like, oh, I dropped the tape at the journalist's office, like movie over, right? Like it's gonna play on like Times Square, and like people are gonna be like, obviously this is bad. And like we are entering the period where we realize this is not the case. You will expose someone for some horrific crime and you'll get like, so that disconnect, I think we need to work on that. How do you make it relevant to people? Yeah, that's it basically.
I mean, that's like a totally fair question. It's like it's a strategic aspect. I think, like basically, I think there's a lot of activist groups in Canada that are doing good work there. But I think, Joe, it looks like you have some thoughts. Am I right in that?
Yeah, well, there's two. I mean, it is basically the appeal has to be on some level, a moral appeal. It's like you should care because your government's doing it, and you should try to stop it. And, you know, I think it can get framed though. Sometimes when we talk about foreign policy, it can get framed as if you're looking to collect money for charity or something, like, you know, please Canadians give money to Venezuela, or please give money to Bolivia, or even to China, wherever, as if it's a charity appeal. And it's not a charity appeal. It's an appeal to say, hey, your government's hurting people and it's your responsibility to stop it. So it's a moral appeal. And I think that's valid. And if people reject it, well, then just frankly, that's immoral. And you have to point that out. So
we are in trouble. Exactly.
You can't pander to some extent. Sometimes you have to just come with the truth and say, look, dude, that's immoral. I mean, your government's doing it, you're responsible, and you're responsible for stopping it. It's really that simple. But there is a self-interested component too, because a lot of this is about driving down wages and working conditions in countries throughout the world. So if they're undercutting you. I mean, unless you're of the elite, you're being undercut, right? And also, I mean, this is a point Dean Baker makes a lot. You know, to the extent, especially, it's perhaps more relevant in the United States because they have such a horrible, just abysmal healthcare system for a rich country. But they deliberately keep out extremely competent doctors, dentists, or professionals who could reduce the costs for the majority of the population if they were, they put all sorts of barriers to prevent them from practicing medicine or dentistry or whatever in the United States. And if they opened that up to basically the competition to allow these professionals to come in, their healthcare costs would go way down. So there's always connections. There's always connections, but at some level, it's a moral argument too. It's just a basic moral argument you have to make.
So what I try to do, like, I guess if I had to give my project like a descriptor or like a goal or whatever, is that I think there's so much good anti-imperialist work out there. Like, there's so many people just digging through. Gray Zone is a great example, but like, there's so many people just exposing all these crimes and stuff like that. And what I generally try to do is always connect it to, like, people online are always like, read theory, but like, I don't know, like going out there and buying a book of theory, like, I don't know, I find it hard, and I'm a pretty bookish person. So I'm like, it seems like it's a tough sell. So what I always try to do is like, listen, like, there is a point to reading theory, and it's not just to sound erudite. Like, there is a point to trying to understand how all these things are connected. If you grasp how your wages are connected to the overall anti-imperialist picture, I think it gets a lot stronger. Now, I wouldn't charge an outlet to like Gray Zone to start kind of like doing like little theory sessions on the side. Like, I don't think that's what they're in for, right? But I do think that's why I put a focus. I keep emphasizing theory. I keep bringing up like I'm like, look at this new event and look at how it ties into old or not that old theory, right? Like, that's kind of what I'm exploring right now. That's what I'm trying to do. But I do think that it's exactly that. It's addressing the fact that people don't know why they should care about imperialism, and it feels bad to try to have to explain to someone this is why you should care about other people. Like, you should just care. You should just care about other people. But given that is not the case, I'm going to try to explain to you why you should care. And I have a feminist friend from Colombia. Well, she's just a friend, but like, she happens to be an excellent feminist, and she wrote this great article about like feminism and literature. And she says, you know what, like, at some point in the past, it would have been good if male writers cared about feminism, because it would have made better literature and it would have made nicer books to read and stuff like that. But you know what, it's 2020, and now it's not your choice anymore. Like, either you care about feminism or your books won't sell anymore. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's she phrases it way better than I could do. I'm not doing it justice here. But the point she makes is that, like, at some point, it's good that you were ethical about it, but at some point you start seeing these people start to clue into the fact that even if they are not empathetic, even if they're not, it's also in their best interests to get on with the program. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I just want to say that everything that you've said is very good. All of us, I guess, is very good. But how do we get our message out to the people? It's more than just a question of morality, because you have to get people to understand justice and peace are related. And in terms of organizing workers or getting this one working person understand that his own exploitation is related to how Canada is exploiting people in Haiti or in Bolivia or elsewhere. And what that needs is an organization. And so I'm just talking in generality from my own experience, that without an organization, it's very difficult to talk to people. For instance, the IWW, they're still around, the Industrial Workers of the World, and they organize these classes for workers, how to organize a union, how to organize meetings, how to do things. I'm not saying that we should join IWW, which in fact I don't really agree wholeheartedly with their politics, because they're more anarchist than anything else. But nevertheless, they do get out there as an organization to try and organize people and trying to teach people how to improve their, their political standing. And Aidan, you were saying that you're going to join the ICL, the Young Communist, the YCL. I mean, there you go. That's an organization, and through these organizations that you can bring other people along, because a person, can be talked to so many times, but what do you give them to do? What he will ask you, what can I do? And so you got to give them some ideas as what they can do to change things. And so I think an organization is one method of doing this, or just get yourself a collective, and as a collective, you would have more of an impact than as an individual. Even though I write these things, I write these articles, how many people actually read them and how would it affect them? I don't know.
For sure. Actually, I want to ask Roderic now, because you started a bit of an interesting project. I believe it's called Red Sails, right? So can you talk a little bit more? Can you talk a bit about that?
It's exactly what I said earlier. It's exactly what I said earlier. I have a friend, Tom Frome. He goes by Tom Frome on Twitter, and he's kind of like an extremely good theorist in my opinion. Like political theory is his jam, and he's, as far as I can tell, like anytime I ask him a question, I kind of like use his answer, or like I basically use his answer, and it's always worked out well for me. I don't know how else to put it. Like he's a sharp theorist. And I'm more of like a news junkie. Like I really like geopolitics and stuff like that. So we basically kind of collaborate, and and we also have other contributors. But we made Red Sails, and it's a combination of our articles that again do this kind of like news connected to current events and theory stuff. And we also kind of like do our selection of favorite essays that we can find that are publicly available. And they cover like a different kind of gamut. Like some of them are very focused on theory, like Nietzsche, like the problem of Nietzsche, because I don't know, I can get into it some other time. But it's kind of like a weird project. We're just trying to put interesting theory out there. I would say that's the gist of it. It's called redsails.org. You can check it out. It's just a bunch of essays. It's just a bucket of essays online. There's nothing else to the project.
No, yeah. Well, it's still something.
And I want to mention one thing. I haven't mentioned this because I joined a while back, and I've gone to like one demo, and mostly other than that participated in the meetings. But I'm also a member of the Communist Party of Canada. So nice. I do strongly believe in organizing. I don't advertise it because I just don't feel like I've done enough, and I feel like if people start asking me a lot of questions, I'm like, I'm not the right person to answer all these questions. But I'm a member of the Communist Party of Canada, and it's pretty cool. Yeah, I definitely think organizing is the way to go.
Nice. I didn't know that. Okay. Breaking news here, eh? Oh, yeah. For sure. Yeah, so I'm looking at the, actually, wait a second. There's one thing we haven't hit on. I just realized this. And this can be something quick. Basically, then if we need to head off, that's totally fair because we've gone for a decent amount of time. But I think we need to talk about Soleimani. So obviously, it was Jay Watts who kind of flagged it down for me originally in one of his tweets. But I mean, I guess the whole thing is we knew that Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general who fought against ISIS, was going to be assassinated, and basically we did nothing about it. So I guess I feel like I probably know your thoughts here, but I mean, it's something I think that's got to be reacted to. Like, thoughts on this? I think it's a pretty big deal.
Well, one of the talking points about Trump is that, well, at least he didn't start any new wars. Okay, but obviously people are saying, well, all he did was expand.
He tried.
Yeah.
He tried
also,
hard.
Yeah, the main people who deserve the credit for him not starting new wars are Iran. Iran deserves essentially all the credit for the fact that Trump didn't start a major war, because they responded to his provocation in a very sane manner. They didn't do nothing, but they didn't go overboard either, and they deserve tremendous credit for that. I don't care what you think about the Iranian government; that's just a fact. And so that's one point I would make.
I totally agree with that. I feel like in general, a lot of the adversaries of the United States behaved very well. Like Maduro also handled the puente, like the aid thing.
State stunt in
Remember?
January. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That truck aid thing was just like pretty horrible. And then even navigating the whole like Guaido trying to start internal disturbances. People in Venezuela wonder like maybe he should have been a bit harsher or whatever. But like I think in general that's another dodged conflict, right?
Excellent point. Excellent.
Yeah. I think a lot of the adversaries of the United States have been kind of like playing their cards just pretty well in this.
And China has been huge to that. I mean, China is a huge source of alternative financing for Latin America. And a lot of the horror of the United States is that they don't want anybody else to give people an outlet to get around these sanctions. Especially Latin America. And the typical right-wing candidates that the United States will support in Latin America are the ones who say, no, we just got to ally with the United States, and they'll be kind of hostile towards China. But China has become such an important alternative that even the right-wing governments are struggling to take that line. Like Ecuador's government, for example, Lenín Moreno, when he came on board in 2017, he was just a monstrous. He ran on the as a left winger and based long. He just made one of the most incredibly cynical reversals and quick reversals that I've ever seen. We expect
absolutely cynical.
We expect politicians to be like that, but this is off the charts. I mean, it's unbelievable. But anyways, he tried to take an anti-China line. A lot of his critique of his predecessor all of a sudden was that all those Chinese deals that Korea made were corrupt. They were all full of corruption. But then he ended up going to China for loans himself, because the reality is that that's just too important a source of financing now, even for the right-wing governments to ignore. So
Biden is going hard against that. There was an article in the Financial Times recently where they're discussing the measures that they're trying to buy up all the Chinese loans, cancel them, and then start like a more like privatization program. It's super gnarly. People often ask me, because I'm so plugged into the news and stuff like that. A lot of my friends from real life, they ask me, how come you're in such a good mood, or how come you all this depressing news? And I'm like, one interesting thing about being plugged into anti-imperialist news is that there's actually a lot of interesting and nice things happening a lot of the time. Like namely, like the Bolivia recovering their government is one, but also the saga of the Iranian supermarket in Venezuela. Exactly. It's like a really cool one. Like Iran and Venezuela cooperating, very sanctioned countries starting this thing. Or like China made a shipment of oil to Venezuela, but they kind of like made the ship go like undercover in radar. I didn't really follow the details very much, but basically China and Venezuela organized this heroic oil transport that was huge for getting Venezuela through a harsh period, right? And nobody reports on this. Like it's egg on the face of the United States. But if you're paying attention, there's these cool things that are happening. Like there's really cool things that are happening, like cooperation between Iran, Venezuela, China. Of course, it's portrayed as this horrible web of evil, but like okay, if you go past that, there is cooperation going on, and it's good. It's inspiring. Yeah, I think Jorge Arreaza, in particular, within the Venezuelan government, he's very talented. I have a friend who swears by him. He's kind of like a fanboy, but he's like Jorge Arreaza went around and kind of like got like he really made sure that let's make this kind of like anti-imperialist front kind of thing. I don't know if it's totally true. This is kind of like his account of it, but Venezuela, like all these people are really putting some good feet forward, defending against this onslaught.
For sure. I mean, the fun note at least is that Arreaza actually published an op-ed in the Canada Files, which was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had. Receiving an op-ed that was quite a shock for me when I got it, but I'll still remember that for a long, long time. But point being, I think Roderic talked about it pretty well. But I mean, there's been solidarity that's been really interesting, and I mean, it's not purely ideological, and that's the thing about the U.S. imperialism and the signs of a declining empire. That things are starting to actually backfire on them. You're seeing like someone like Venezuela and Iran. I mean, I don't think you'd naturally see them politically eye to eye, but because of what's happened to them, I mean, they have to ally. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure North Korea has been working with like Iran, or North Korea has been connecting with a lot of countries that you probably wouldn't connect with regardless. Basically, you have like a lot of these kind of like socialist countries, these actually existing socialist countries, actively working with these countries that aren't socialist or maybe even aren't left, but they are anti-imperialist. And that's the key thing that seems to be uniting a lot of these forces, is there's like a really, really strong anti-imperialist surge. I guess the main thing for me is, I mean, it's a funny thing for me to say, but I think the world is like starting to learn some of the lessons basically from the past. I think it's almost, we've reached a bit of a point where things have happened enough times where people can start to see ahead. And obviously the danger with Biden is maybe they're more effective, and like the technocratic, like technocratic really overthrows of governments and stuff like that might be more effective. But you're starting to see like these groups, these governments, not groups, working together really, really well. Now, Joe, there is something you mentioned, an interesting group that actually has struggled as a result of American imperialism under Trump. However, I think it was BRICS, right? Can you detail what's going on there?
Oh, well, just Pompeo put on this, there's this BRICS kind of, I don't know what you'd call it. It's a kind of a cooperation network that was, it was Brazil, Brazil, India, China.
It's Brazil, Russia, India, China.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah. South Africa.
South Africa.
South Africa. Yeah,
South Africa, yes.
Yeah, so it was a kind of a coalition that were starting to, I mean, in a tame manner somewhat, but they were forming an alternative, because, so Pompeo was boasting on Twitter, like, hey, we managed to break off the B and the I, Brazil and India, because they both have far right governments, so he's openly putting that out on Twitter. So that's one characteristic of the, maybe it's partly because of the internet doesn't allow these guys to hide their intentions as well as back in the pre-internet days. That kind of thing maybe wouldn't have got out as easily, that blatantly. But also it's just the characteristic of the Trump government is that they have no filter, no shame, no, and I think that rankled a lot of their establishment as well. They wish they would have been more discreet, So like at one point Trump boasted that he's pressuring Saudi Arabia to I believe drop oil prices, saying just pressuring them to drop oil prices. This was a few years back. So basically putting their dirty dealings and their manipulations out front, out in the open. That bothered people. But I have to say also that one thing that shocked me, and I would never have predicted, and I should have predicted, is that is Trump, despite, in fact, because he was so disgusting, countries like Canada jump in to kind of legitimize his foreign policy because they know that, this guy's not credible. So when he attacks Venezuela, we're going to have to jump into it too, like with the Lima group, so that we can give political cover to it. Say, okay, you don't like Trump, okay, but you know what, on Venezuela, he's right. It's because Canada kind of steps in to try to fill the credibility gap. So does the Europeans, they jump in with that. They did the same thing back in 2004 in Haiti when George W. Bush was thoroughly discredited around the world because of Iraq, by 2004. So when they wanted to overthrow Jean-Bertrand Aristide in Haiti, Canada was right in there like a dirty shirt. And Canada at that time had maybe a little bit more credibility because officially, at least, they didn't go along with the invasion. Same with France. France officially kind of distanced themselves from the Iraq invasion, and they also went heavily involved with helping the United States overthrow the Aristide government. So it's really a team effort. The United States is the big bully, but they have a lot of. It's really important for them to get the Canada and European countries involved to support them to kind of help put a nicer face on what they do.
For sure. It's been one of the more interesting things, especially starting an outlet in that right in the middle of that era, has been that basically Canada's come to the forefront on a lot of basically the newest imperialist pushes. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but basically, yeah. I mean, quite frankly, it's been one of those things that's actually exposed Canadian foreign policy for the better. I think I don't know how much it's basically been able to dilute the kind of reputation of Canada internationally. But I mean, like a classic example of this is Canada losing the race for a UN Security Council seat. Basically, that is like, for example, and I have to give great credit to the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, who I'm fortunate enough to co-host a podcast, Canadian Foreign Policy Files, with Yvonne Glaire and Arnold August, who are fellows at that institute. They did some great work, and obviously so many other organizations did as well. Numerous organizations in Canada, basically, that worked hard to kind of showcase, right, Canadian foreign policy for what it is, which is sovereign, yet truly also very tied to the U.S. And so it's Canada's kind of in an interesting situation because it's not so much a formal vassal state. Like, I mean, like you think of maybe like a Taiwan, that kind of area that basically you could see as grounds for like a vassal state. But in Canada's case, it is like genuine separate imperialism on its own, which also just dovetails really closely with the U.S. And I mean, this era of Trump actually, in terms of political consciousness, it actually has been obviously Trump has been horrible, but it's been an interesting exercise in that the kind of facade of liberalism has kind of been ripped off by him. And I think that's probably the one semi decent legacy Trump will have, is that he was kind of the buffoon that people finally were able to see through the system because he was just so, quite frankly, over the top and clown-like.
I think if there's a job for us, is to make sure it sticks. People forget. So it's good to kind of like make sure that it sticks. It's not just Trump, it's America. Funny thing about how they report it, it's like when Trump does something that kind of is a little bit iffy, it's like Trump did this. But when Trump does something that they like applying sanctions in China, it's like the United States did this. It's kind of like this subtle kind of like, the Trump things we may want to remove, but the United States things, those are good. Yeah, I think that's the main problem, is the fact that I was a bit discouraged to learn, for example, just as I learned about past history, about what the United States, again, no sympathy for Japan here, but like Japan was soaring in semiconductor development in the 80s, and like its industry was taking off, and the United States just completely crippled them with like this, like, again, I haven't dived deeply into it, but basically the United States fully, openly, like it's an economics case study, destroyed or like subordinated Japan's tech industry to their own. And it bothers me that this is forgotten, just like the Vietnam War is forgotten, like the invasion of Vietnam is forgotten, the invasion of Korea, like the war in Korea is forgotten. Like a lot of these things are forgotten. And I think how to make sure that people don't forget about stuff is important. Like people often don't even know that. I mean, at least the people I talk to, I'm like, people are like, Obama didn't do anything wrong. And I'm like, he invaded Libya. People are like, what? You know what I mean? Like, it's important to not let people forget. I don't know how you achieve that, but I think, of course, the proliferation of anti-imperialist media outlets is going to help in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, like a classic example of this in the Canadian sense is like Lester B. Pearson and his imperialism and his imperialist nature, obviously because he's glorified for the peacekeeping narrative. Basically, like you think of Canada's connections with Vietnam and basically imperialism towards Vietnam and the horrific war that was launched upon Vietnam for, quite frankly, the crime of being an existing socialist nation. Basically, there is, like, I think, basically, you said it best, really, when you say it's got to stick. Like, that's part of the reason why I'm such a firm believer in having, like the Canada Files mission is basically people need to see foreign policy, constantly see it in the current context, but also basically people, in a sense, basically part of it is also you got to make sure they don't slip behind the propaganda barrier again. And so, as you said before, really, it's a constant battle. It's a battle I think we can win, but basically it's one where the work has to be relentless, quite frankly. And I mean, it's a challenge I enjoy. So.
Same here. I may have to sign up soon. I think I'm about to have some other things to do, but I don't know. I'm down for some few last minutes of conversation. I don't know if everyone's signing off. Maybe we say last words, or if you guys are going to stick around, I can just say bye.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's probably not actually, I mean, a bad time to do that. So, yeah, why doesn't everyone say a little bit of last words? We can do some plugs, and then basically we can sign off, because I think we've been going for 2 hours. So,
All right. Want to start with me?
sure.
Okay. Well, I have a book coming out in June that I'm finalizing with Justin Potter. It's about it's called Extraordinary Threat: 20 Years of Coup Attempts Against Venezuela. It's about the Western media and its the vilification campaign for the last 20 years against Venezuela. So that's coming out in June. So we'll hopefully that'll make some kind of dent. And it's one way to, as Roderic pointed out, to keep the history alive is you have to get it down and you have to keep talking about it. And, there's really no other way. So, yeah, and I think, again, we have to think hard about getting funding for people doing this kind of work, doing this kind of analysis, and getting it through, through the media vouchers, getting government money to support it. And you can get that at the local level too. It doesn't have to be the national level government. The municipal or provincial government can be pressured to start supporting independent media. Just like we pressure them to support public education, public health care. We need a real public media that's independent to shift the conversation so that we aren't, we'll have a better chance of getting civilized policies. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks very much for inviting me. It's been nice talking to you guys.
All right.
Yeah,
so,
I just want to echo Joe's sentiments as well in terms of trying to get some funding to keep the Canada Files going. And I also like to plug my book now that Joe has opened the door. My book's called Being Chinese in Canada: The Struggle for Identity, Redress, and Belonging, published by Douglas and McIntyre. It's a book about essentially the history of the Chinese in Canada, the struggles that the Chinese went through, and particularly my own family. So if you're interested in reading about the struggles of the Chinese from the early days, from building the CPR to the redress movement, maybe you can give that book a look. So keep up the good work, and it was very nice meeting all of you tonight.
It's my turn. Yeah, I have no book. No book yet. I do hope one day, I hope maybe I'll collect enough material. Again, very nice conversation. Very nice talking to you guys. Keep up the good work, everyone. You can find me on Twitter at Roderic Day, and the website where I'm putting all those essays I mentioned earlier is redsails.org. Red sails, like a boat. You'll see. Yeah. Anyway, that's it.
Okay.
All right, great. So I guess I'll do the little plug myself. So obviously, basically people would know basically my Twitter and such, Facebook at this point. It's just Aidan Jonah. In terms of basically the Canada Files, obviously William talked about supporting the Canada Files work. It's patreon.com/theCanadaFiles. No spaces there. If you want to support my work personally as the Canada Files editor-in-chief financially, that is actually going to be at patreon.com/Aidan Jonah. It's my name, no spaces. So yeah, that's the big thing there. Obviously, go follow the Canada Files on Facebook, Twitter. We do have Instagram, which we're not using a ton. And obviously, the website is www.thecanadafiles.com. And if you want to have a constant eye on the news and content that comes out from the Canada Files, basically that is going to be the newsletter. If you go onto the site and you haven't subscribed to it yet, it should pop up. Just put your email in there. It'll be entered into the list. And when the newsletter gets sent out daily, you will not miss any of said content. And oh wait, one last thing I remembered. I have a lot of plugs as usual. But in terms of PayPal, basically we set up a PayPal for the Canada and for myself. Basically, it's in my, if you go to basically, if you go to Twitter, if you go to my Twitter, you'll see the pinned tweet. You'll see my PayPal and the Canada PayPal. Both you're able to do one-time donations, which should make it easier for people just in case. Good news for Patreon now is you can donate in Canadian dollars, which I think is something they added recently. Anyways, I think that's the extent of the promotions for me. Just look for a really big article tomorrow in Plan A magazine, like on the Canadian left, Jianjing, and kind of like how the shame about colonialism is kind of really clouded basically the collective left, and I'd say mainly social democratic left judgment on the key issues around Jianjing. So thanks a ton, William, Roderic, and Joe. I cannot appreciate you guys coming out enough. And yeah, basically, if anyone popped in late, this stream will be available on Twitch, YouTube as well. Either one works. Basically, if you want to follow my Twitch, obviously that would be the one thing that'd be great. Please do follow my Twitch. Basically, I have plans there. I also stream basically games and certain stuff like that during the week when I have time just to chill out and do something different, so people get to see maybe a bit more of the fun, not news guy kind of side of me. So yeah, hopefully people will definitely consider doing that. Anyways, I think I have linked everything possible. So thank you so much. Like I said before, Roderic, William, Joe, I cannot emphasize how much I appreciate basically you guys popping on, being guests for this. This is something I really have high hopes for, and I think hopefully part of it is to bring some of the Canadian left figures together. Just because I think really when we're unified, we have a ton of strength. So thanks a ton, and we'll definitely be in touch outside of this in some endeavors in the not so far future. But yeah, thanks you to the audience. Thank you for the engagement. And I think we'll be signing off for tonight. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.